Good day and welcome back to the Hopkins demonstration forest. This is part 7 of what is a forest. And over the last couple of videos we talked about the non-living or abiotic, and I wanted to start moving into the biotic or the living. And to do that we're going to quickly kick it off with identification and talking about some of the plants out here, specifically here at Hopkins. So one of the things that you'll notice behind me is the plants. They start down really low on the ground and they grow all the way up. There's different layers to our forests. Some forests have just a single layer, maybe when it's very young. All the plants, trees, all the plants out there, big and small, they're all about the same size. As a forest ages, those plants start to differentiate. Some plants grow very tall, the trees. So a tree is a plant that typically grows over 30 feet tall, has a main stem. Anything under that 30 feet or 10 meters that has a woody stem, we often refer to as a shrub. So we have that tree layer, and it grows from very small to very tall. And then between that 30-foot, 10-meter height and somewhere off the ground, a foot or so, those woody stem plants, the shrubs. And we get down to the next layer below that, we have kind of a mix of different things, ferns, or we have kind of that herbaceous or forbs that we call them. Plants that have either the ferns, like they have a spore, how they reproduce, or the herbs and forbs have a flower and not a woody stem. And then there's some grasses and other things and mosses as you get closer to the ground too. But we're going to be focusing on the ones that we can really identify and easily see. And even though it's the winter right now, there are a lot of plants here in Oregon, especially some of the shrubs, that are evergreen, but most of our trees that we have out here that are evergreen are conifers. So the conifers, the trees with those needles or scales, most of our trees here in Oregon retain those all year. And most of the trees we have here in Oregon that have leaves are deciduous, those broadleaf trees. We do have a couple out here, one in particular, the Pacific madrone, is an evergreen broadleaf. So it's a little difficult sometimes to identify, but if you start now and work your way into the spring and then into the fall, sometimes you can get those different stages those plants are in so you can better identify them. And we often identify plants by looking at things very simply as the leaf, or a smaller leaf, the needle. So that's often the way we identify plants. Other ways we identify them is we look at other characteristics like the flower, the seed, if they have one, or a fruit of some sort. And then if that doesn't work, sometimes even the bark characteristics are something we can look at. But what we often need are some guides and some books to get started. So I have a couple I wanted to review today, and I did a little review of this last spring, but I want to talk about it again. Here is a really good book. It's a desk copy called The Plants of the Pacific Northwest, and it goes on to say Coast, Washington, Oregon, British Columbia, and Alaska. So Plants of the Pacific Northwest Coast. We often refer to it by the author Pojar, P-O-J-A-R. It's a great book. It's got tons of different plants in it, a nice description with some details, but it's really it's a desk copy, and for someone a little more advanced in identifying plants, because it's got a lot of detail that you have to be a little more experienced with. Another book that I reviewed last spring and talked about, which is a great source for doing just the trees, is Trees to Know in Oregon. And if you search this up on Google and do Trees to Know in Oregon, Oregon State University, you'll come up actually with a web page that will lead you through the process of identifying some of the plants. The nice thing about this book is it has some of the terminology in it, but it has something that I referred to last time as a dichotomous key. That dichotomous key kind of takes us through a yes, no, true, false sort of question to identify some of the differences in the plants. And it does it both for the conifer and broadleaf. So a good book, but one of the problems with this is it's just limited to the trees and plants. It's got a lot of good resources in it, but not necessarily the best field guide. So one of the things that we created out here at Hopkins was a guide. You can see it there. The Hopkins Native Plant Guide, and it focuses mostly on the North Willamette Valley. And rather than breaking this out with a dichotomous key, we have a little kind of guide in there, but it's got some of the terminology on the shapes that we're going to be identifying of the leaves, their arrangement. We broke it down into a couple different groups. One are the ferns. The next group, the herbs and forbs. I'm just flipping to a random page here. The next one, the shrubs. And then lastly, we have a mix of the broadleaf trees. And then end with some of the conifers. So this is a real easy guide, and what I've done with this is created an online emailable form. If you're interested in this, you can get this free. And I'll send that information out in this video so you can figure out how to reach out and contact Oregon State University at Clackamas County, or the Extension Service there, or myself. But a really good guide that simplifies the process. So rather than having a dichotomous key where we go through this list of questions, what we do with this guide is we find a sample. Let's just take, for example, a pretty easy one to identify. And we look at this and we can tell, well, it has needles. So it's a conifer. The needles are about 1.5 inches long. So I would flip to the guide here and go to conifer, and rather than kind of looking at the characteristics initially, I kind of look at the photos. And I just flip. I call this the Google effect. If you've ever wanted to find something out and you don't know, you see like a bug with a yellow stripe and it's brown. So you type in Google, brown yellow bug with stripe that's yellow in Oregon. And you click images, and a whole bunch of images come up, and you kind of flip through those. Well, we made this really simple because there's only about 5 or 6 conifers that are common up here to our native forests in Oregon. In the North Willamette Valley here in Oregon. And so I start comparing it. I kind of look and I say, well, it kind of looks. I look around on the ground. I can also find like a cone. And so then I start reading the characteristics. Needles are 1.5 inches to 2 inches long. Yeah, that's about right. Large pointed buds. So there's some little points on the end of the plant where the new growth comes from. And I kind of see those. Cones are 3-pronged bracts. I had one of those. Look, there's another one. These little things hanging out. It actually looks just like it. So I kind of match the picture, I get the description, and then I come up with, if you haven't guessed it, this is a pretty easy one out here, Douglas fir. So it's a very simple guide that's, I like to say, very tactile when you get it in printed form, but I also have this available to email to anyone that's interested in a PDF, so you can head out and do some of your own plant identification. So it's really important to identify plants, whether you use a very elaborate guide or just the simplest ones. There's also a lot of other ones out there. Because once you understand the plants that are in the forest, you can start making some associations and connections to what might be using that forest. Humans, of course, we have different products that come from those trees, but that's not what we're thinking about. At least I'm not talking about here. It's the habitat, the food source. So if I can start identifying, what is this plant that has some leaves on it here on the ground? Well, it has kind of an interesting leaf structure that's different from some others around it. The leaves are in different positions, so they aren't apart from each other. They're alternate. They go from one down instead of being apart, like being in this case, if they were side by side, opposite. Again, some terminology you learn from these books. I can identify that plant is Salao, And salal, if I look it up, has a berry, which is an important food source for some of our native animals. And it is a native plant here in Oregon. So when you start figuring out what the plants are that are in that forest community, you can start then making some associations of the wildlife, and that extends that beyond to the next part of the biotic part of our forest. It's not just about the plants, it's about the animals and all the interactions of everything in between. So plant identification, it's a great thing to get out and do. Go out, explore, find a new plant. Once you learn it, the cool thing is you've learned it, and you've learned it probably for the rest of your life. Especially if you live here in Oregon and you see these trees all the time. So I can look behind me and I can just find a nice sample and know for certain that if it looks like a scaly plant, a conifer, looks like a cedar. If I'm here at Hopkins, about 99.9% of the time, I know that's a western red cedar. I can also, if I'm not certain, look and identify on the plant. I can find, if I could, may not be able to do it if I pull this down. Here's one, but I'd start inspecting it for the cones. And if I happen to find a little cone, which there's one right there, and pinch it off and look at it, it resembles the shape of a kind of a rosebud or a full rose. So those are the things you start to learn when you do plant identification. Some plants are very easy. Some plants are hard. The hardest thing right now, and you'll have to wait till next spring, are these leaves. Because again, a lot of our plants are deciduous. A lot of the plants that flower, where we need a flower to identify them, those are only here in the spring. So you just can't do plant identification one time during the year. You got to start, and no better time than right now. Start working on the conifers, working on the shrubs that are evergreen, even some of the ferns, like right here. We've got a sword fern. Start working on those, and as more plants come on through the growing season, when winter ends and spring starts, you'll start getting plants flowering at different times. And if you can pick off a couple of plants once a month, go out and find a few different ones by the end of the year, you'll have a pretty good understanding of some of the basic plants here in Oregon's forest, and especially here at Hopkins. So again, I encourage you to go and explore, not necessarily go out and purchase the big heavy desk kind of copy, but great field guide if you're experienced, but more of a desk copy, the Pojar book. Online, Trees to Know in Oregon. Oregon State University puts out a website that'll have an online way that you can identify some of those trees. Goes through that process. But if you're really interested in the Hopkins Native Plant Guide, I would be happy to send you an electronic copy. Just look in the description of this video and on the Facebook post, and you'll find a way to reach out and get that copy emailed to you. It's about a 1.5 meg file. So anyways, not really about how to identify plants, but just that's what we're going to start to do out here a little bit, and we're going to start looking more at that biotic here at Hopkins. So enjoy the great days to come. There's some beautiful sunshine to be had in the winter. It's a little chilly at times, but it's a whole different forest, and you get to experience it in a different way. So get out there, explore, and see you back here at Hopkins real soon. Thanks a lot.